Yes.
Yes.
So I just want to say welcome to Maurizio Atzeni, who has accepted to participate in this lunch seminars, and many of us have read his work and appreciate it. And I just leave the floor to Lorenzo Cini to introduce Maurizio and then to lead the discussion.
Yes, I'm very honored to have Maurizio Atzeni with us today, because as also Donatella already presented before, is the author that have been came across over the last 2 years in our work. So I can be considered also one of our entry points into the field of study of industrial relations. So we are then very happy to have Maurizio here, who was and it's important to notice it. He was also one former supervisee of Guglielmo. Guglielmo can tell me also Maurizio if I'm wrong, when they were in Warwick. So he's one of his first supervisees. Then he had over the last 10 years, in my view, but not in my view, impressive records of publication on this field of industrialization, with a peculiar focus on agency of workers. So he represents, it has been a very important contributor of that line of research that has been quite relevant over the last year in emphasizing workers' agencies, also in terms of self-organization capacity of workers, also in contrast to traditional trade unions. And it has been an impressive record of publication in top industrial journals such as Work Employment Society, Global History, and other that have been actually very inspiring for many of us who are trying to enter the field from a social movement perspective. I would say that now it was also supposed to be a visiting scholar in Scuola Normale Superiore, but unfortunately for the COVID crisis, he cannot come, and so we will have Maurizio only online. This is a pity, but I'm sure that in the future will be other opportunity and occasion to meet him in person, both in Scuola Normale Superiore in Florence and maybe also in other conferences around Europe and the world. And today, Maurizio, if also Guglielmo, I think now is there. If you have a microphone, you can maybe add some words on, since you had also prepared also a presentation of as a moderator. But today he will present his more recent theoretical elaboration and studies on his idea that industrial relation needs, to a certain extent, a reformulation in terms of introducing and sending to a different line of research encompassing not only trade unions and state institutions, but also social and material processes pertaining to class formation processes and so on and so forth. So I think it's a very refreshing view of this field of study, and for us as also group of scholars who has a very specific approach on social movement dynamics, I think will be also a inspiring source for all of us. If Guglielmo wants to add something, if now the mic works, he might also, I can give you the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So I don't have anything to add. You introduced Maurizio very well, so I can only say hello to him, given that I've known him for about 20 years. And maybe I add just one thing that may be interesting for all our PhD students at this specific difficult time for fieldwork, because I remember Maurizio went to Argentina to do his PhD research, and his project was on labor in the Fiat factories in Argentina in December 2001. I think basically while he was on the plane to Argentina, the economy collapsed, the pesos collapsed, and by the time he landed, the factory had shut down. And he couldn't do the research he wanted to do. So it's not only in the last year that people have had to be creative and imaginative about how to do with fieldwork and research. And I remember Maurizio very well revised his project and turned it into a more oral history-based analysis of labor mobilizations in Argentina, which was then produced as a book and as a couple of very important articles that contributed to mobilization theory. It was not what he intended to do, but in a way he managed to make the most out of a difficult situation. So he's always been a very creative thinker and original thinker. His contribution to labor process debates are always very provocative and worth listening to. So I don't want to add anything more because it's his time. Thank you.
Well, I'm flattered by the invitation and by the presentation. And Guglielmo is right. I actually had to change my PhD proposal completely, but actually it was in the good way, because when I started my PhD, I was looking for different employment relation or HRM practices. I was coming from that sort of information and background, and I found out that actually there was something else in a factory that was closing. So the same might be for your students now with the COVID crisis, in terms of reinventing also their maybe theoretical approach to the field. You can hear me well, right? Okay.
Yes, very well.
Yes.
Okay, just let me know in case not. Well, for today, I thought that it could have been useful to present sort of overview of what has been social and labor mobilization in Argentina in the last 20 years approximately, which correspond exactly to my fieldwork experience, which, as Guglielmo said, started in 2000, and then in 2001, the big economic crisis, which put the country upside down from many points of view. Actually, the December 2001 social upheaval, it was at the end of a process that started at the end of the 1990s. Argentina was a dollar late country, but actually the parity with the pesos was just fake and based on debts. Which of course international financial institutions were happy to borrow to Argentina, even if they knew that it was impossible for the country to pay it back, at least in reasonable time and quantities. So actually the processes that developed in the 2001 crisis were already there. So all of us know privatization, full-scale neoliberalism, labor reforms, and of course closures of factories, dismantling of entire industrial sector, which were sort of protected before the liberalization of the 90s. So the end of the 90s was a crisis of employment, with 20% unemployed, and an increase or at least the beginning of a strong cycle of precariousness. So it was a crisis which was a crisis of work, even though it was with the suit of the social movement, because trade unions were actually accompanying, at least for the majority of the sort of neoliberal years, the government in charge, which was a Peronist one. I don't want to open now the brackets on Peronism and trade unions, but can come later with this. So trade unions were not actually, at least initially, in favor or against the government. So they were open to this measure. So workers organized because they were unemployed, and they organized by themselves, building their territorial organizations connected to the neighborhoods, reclaiming work. So the movement of the unemployed emerged in many cities, particularly cities where there used to be an industrial development, like for instance in lots of towns based on oil extraction, and they developed also tactics which were then used by workers which were more formally employed, as the roadblocks. And so here we see then in what I put in the abstract, this pendulum movement between social movements and trade unionism. We see here clearly the social movement side of this pendulum, but it's a social movement side of workers reclaiming work, workers that have lost work, that want to be part again of that formal work, which used to be actually the sort of exception of Argentina compared to other Latin American countries. At least until the early 80s, Argentina was a country with 70% formal sector, and with high salaries, in a way comparable to the well-developed social democracy and welfare states in Europe. This changed starting from the end of the 70s and the process of liberalization that culminated in the 90s, parity peso dollars and all the liberalization, full-scale liberalization of the 90s. So this the post-2001 crisis saw a sort of at least in the discourse, a rejection of neoliberalism and the government, which was again a Peronist government, but this time with the less with a more progressive sort of left, center-left view, and with a recipe of growth with inclusion, which it was like a sort of return to classic Peronism, the Peronism of the 50s, which was a movement based on internal market consumption, so the growth of internal marketing, the growth of local industries, but of course in a changed context, because now Argentina and the world has changed, and it's too strong probably the weight of Argentina as agricultural commodity exporter compared to industrial production. So this process of growth with inclusion was basically dependent on the boom of the agricultural commodity, which luckily for Argentina started around 2002, 2003, and continued at least till the the 2008-2009 crisis. So this agricultural commodity boom fueled the possibility of investing in industry and nurturing the internal market, which generated new employment, formal employment, which reduced a bit the number of unemployed within at least a sort of a more reasonable number. So I think it was around 7-8%. But still keeping 36% of the population in condition of informality, precariousness of different sort, but this growth of good employment, formal employment, has been anyway positive. In which sense? And here I go back to the pendulum. So in the sense of strengthening trade unions as a movement, so strengthening trade unions because the government was a government which was pro-labor, which was a sort of, again, here as a sort of tradition of Peronism, building his political power using as a pillar the union movement. So trade unions were, part of tripartite kind of organizations. New rounds of collective bargaining were regularly held, and this was again something new compared to the 90s. So a new role for trade union as institution was set, because clearly the government was keen to get support from the institution, from the trade unions institutions, but at the same time, because of the process of inflation that started in 2005, and because of this incentive for workers to get organized, because there was a real growth in terms of employment, in terms of formal employment, labor conflict were also a part of the picture. So not just the growth of trade unions as institution, but also a growth of workplace mobilization, workplace conflict, and here in different forms. So very often it was against the union representing workers in that particular sector, and here Argentina has the particularity of having a workers' representation based on industrial sector. There is one trade union per industrial sector or per economic activity, and because of this monopoly of representation, very often a group of workers which are against the trade unions leadership mobilize by basically self-organizing if there's no legal representation in their own workplaces. But very often, especially in big workplaces, workers have a sort of local of their union in the factory, so they can organize in the factory with the legal protection. So this is something which is historical in Argentina. So this sort of double movement between attempt of self-organization, which are very often anti-bureaucratic, against the bureaucracy of the trade unions. And this has been like very, very sort of positive in terms of Argentina, in terms of the history of labor conflict and labor relation in Argentina, because it does allow very often the possibility to overcome this bureaucracy and bureaucratization that is part of the legal system of Argentina, which is very verticalist and is an heritage again of Peronism. So when there was a direct chain of command between the leader Peron and the union leader in the 1950s, this has remained in a way. Very often we find trade unions with general secretary which are there since 30 years. And so this, just to give you an idea of the kind of system that there is here in Argentina, but at the same time are lively, so to say, trade unions with internal opposition, in some places with more democracy, in others with less democracy, but all the time with this sort of latent possibility of contestation. So in the pendulum, then during the first decade of the 2000, we see the workers' movements, so labor movements in the traditional sense, taking the lead, and this at least till 2015, which was the year when the last Peronist government was in power. The first one was with Nestor Kirchner, and then the two following with his wife, which is a very experienced politician, Cristina Fernandez. They continued this sort of model of inclusion and growth with inclusion, of course, interrupted in 2008, 2009 by the global crisis, which of course affected Argentina because there was less interest in agricultural commodities, and this of course created a deficit in terms of the economy, and which remained anyway in a stable, at least till that moment. And this situation changed again in 2015 and 16, and from 16 till today, when Macri took power with again a new neoliberal agenda in terms of politics and labor politics. And so again, here we see then with this change in politics, a retreat of unions as institutions, as movements, and the return of social movements, because the social movement didn't disappear with the growth of the formal sector after 2001. They were partly co-opted, they were partly sort of institutionally included into social assistance or welfare, sort of welfare schemes, or some of the social movement took the road to cooperativism, partly using the experience of Recover Factory, which was one of the social experiments very important in Argentina after, starting in 2001 with workers occupying their factory as a way of saving their jobs, saving their income. And so this experience was, and this still followed by social movements organizing at territorial level. And just to give you an idea of how strong were these social movement when Macri came into power, the first thing he did was to set an agreement with workers belonging to this sector. So these are the sort of the hardcore of informality and precariousness in Argentina. Again, this about 30%, which is of course now increased to 50% of Argentinian population, is still a population that live at the margin of the formal economy. So at the margin of the possibility for trade unions, as we know them, to organize them. But just to give you then an idea of the strength of this movement, when Macri came into power in 2016, the first thing he did, facing the threat of a huge mobilization by these movements, which have the power of number and the power of people that have the possibility of mobilizing, because are people without job very often. Very often are women, mother, going to the marches with their kids. That the first thing Macri did was to set an agreement, transferring a huge amount of money to the movements in order to keep social conflict down, and start with his politics of neoliberal shape. So here we see then again, during the Macri government, a return of social movements powerfully, and a retreat, or at least a sort of defensive attitude by workers in the formal sector. And then last part of this up and downs and this pendulum movement of working class mobilization in Argentina, we can see the year of COVID with a new government, which was irritating a huge debt. Once again, thanks to the IMF for lending money to Argentina when it was impossible to give this money back. But well, there is this now this huge debt, huge economic crisis, and a situation in which probably Argentina is going to change forever into a Latin American country. This is at least my feeling. So what we have seen in this year and something almost, is a compression of the working class income, both formal and informal, and a solidarity measure by workers in the formal sector, which have seen their salary frozen, despite inflation at 35-40%. Particularly, public sector workers are bearing the cost of solidarity measure in favor of informal workers, which in a situation like the COVID, they have lost even the gig work that they could have during a normal economic situation. So what we see is then like a sort of solidarity within the working class, but not within the nation. And this is, for instance, clearly evidenced by the fact that while public sector workers, for instance, were seeing their salary frozen compared to inflation, to pay for subsidies going to save jobs in the formal sector and to help with emergency assistance workers in the informal sector. At the same time, the government was helping the exporter of commodities, or agricultural commodities, by reducing the taxes on exports in order to incentive them to export, and then to allow the country to receive dollars. So that's a dynamic which I think, given the current global political economy of capitalism, in which Argentina is a primary exporter of agriculture, but also mining and water and other things that comes from nature, but quite less in terms of industry. And I tend to think that at least the industry that might develop here is not going to be the industry that can employ people, that can give formal work, that can create working classes and working class identity, at least as the one we used to know. So that's why I'm saying that we are here in the pendulum. We will probably go toward a new situation in which we don't know if there will be new alliances, a new reconstitution of the working class across the precariousness line. But clearly, there is going to be, and there are processes of proletarianization of the formal sector, and then a squeeze and sort of flattening of the income of the working class compared to the wealth produced in this country. So that's why I'm saying that there is a bit sort of transformation of Argentina into a classic Latin American country like maybe Bolivia or Peru, or even Chile. But Chile at least has a full-scale neoliberalism, which it might pay some sort of return on investment. So they have, for instance, like the higher education sector and certain technological sector very well developed, which might not be the case in a country like Argentina, which has also different kind of numbers, of course, but just to round up all these and then this sort of history of development of working class organization in Argentina, and to translate this into sort of more theoretical or more theoretical insight for us as experts and people interested in industrial relation and labor relation, and in looking at how workers organize to change their condition. Here, I think that this history tells us that well, we should probably adopt a class perspective or a class analysis in our field, and try to go a little bit beyond trade unions. So this is what I've said recently in a paper in a provocative way, by saying, well, there is a trade union fetishism in studies of industrial relation, which we need to overcome. And because by overcoming this, by raising the issue of fetishism, we can then develop different kind of analysis, which are more based on the materiality lived by workers. So why workers organize? Because they have certain material conditions that are allowing them to organize. They may share the same labor process. They may develop network of solidarities, and these, not the union form, are or should be our focus, or at least our initial focus. So what I see is that very often there is like an emphasis on the organization per se, and the starting point of analyzing even issue of precariousness or migrants workers within the union framework, which it doesn't allow us to understand how class is developing, how class are composed and recomposed, to use the autonomist Marxist framework. So how workers alternate between then the social movement form and the union form in their way of organizing and the kind of organization they use. Here we can open another, of course, big chapter, which of course has to do with Argentina, because in this sense, Argentina is the exception that confirmed the rule in a way, because it's a country that, compared to other, has a very strong history and very strong presence of trade union, even in conditions very difficult like the one we are experiencing now. But I'll leave this to the discussion, and the discussant will be probably raise other points. So I'll end my presentation here.
Thank you, Maurizio. Well, we have two discussion. So I would start maybe from Lorenzo. I don't know whether you have the order is fine. Lorenzo Cini.
Maybe no. I was thinking actually to give a floor to Enrico, maybe, as I already spoke too much before. But as you wish, you are the moderator. So
I mean, I have
to you.
that point. Perfect. Fine then. Enrico.
It's perfectly the same if you want to start, Lorenzo.
No, because you might be more on the. I guess you will be more sort on the engaged with the Argentinian case, I suppose, as well. And I prepare also more on this theoretical background. If you have done like that, we could proceed in this way, if you all agree.
Okay, I will try to be short. Thank you. Thank you, Maurizio. Great presentation. A lot of things to think about. I read with really your fascinating work on the Argentine case, and I have some questions for you, some things to put on the table for your answer, for your reflection. I would start from the last thing you put in your presentation about trade union fetishism and the necessity of going beyond that. I think that overall, in many scholars that analyze the evolution of Argentina during the last, I would say, 30 years, have in fact focused on this theme, in the sense that the division in terms of representation between the former workers and the outsiders have been vastly explored. I think that it is very important to I mean, in order to grasp the Argentine evolution, to focus on the linkages that the Peronist Party established with different sectors of society throughout these decades. Because I personally found perfect your reconstruction of the union strategies and behaviors during, I mean, starting from Menem to the Kirchnerist phase, the different ways they establish linkages with the government of Menem first. Just, I mean, there is the work of Sebastián Echemendi, who explore in a very detailed way this the kind of retention of organizational power in detriment of the workers, and thus the loss of jobs and the job shrinking.
We lost Enrico.
Yes, we lost him. Let's wait for a minute. See if Maurizio, did you manage to get at least part of the line of questioning, or
no?
Let's wait.
I got. I mean, he was starting to ask about the linkages of Peronism, and then I don't know what exactly he wanted to know or to ask.
Let's hope he can get back.
Maybe we can shift to Lorenzo and then go back with.
Let's wait another minute. Maybe I just keep going on the Peronism one. I'm not sure what Enrico wanted to say, but this is a general concern. If we have a few people here also studying populism in our department, in our faculty. And therefore, whenever we hear somebody from Argentina, we want always to know something more about Peronism. It is possible to see something similar to the Peronist ideal model also in other countries. If you think about Trump trying to lure the trade unions at the beginning of his presidency, the Polish populists supported by Solidarity, many populist parties trying to get a sort of little labor wing. And these often are named as neo-Peronist attempts. But in Argentina, is that way of incorporation of the labor movement still viable, still visible? And does this explain some of your argument that there is less space in trade unions than maybe in countries where trade unions are more pluralist, and therefore, if you don't like one, you create another one? A reflection on that is certainly of interest for everybody. I'm not sure that was what Enrico wanted to focus on, but maybe while we wait for him to reconnect, because I don't see him, maybe you can start explaining a little bit more just on that, and then we get back to
yes.
to
Let me see from where I can start, just to give you an idea of the puzzle. I think there is clearly an history. Okay.
Maybe Enrico is back. Can you?
Yes.
No, I am very sorry because I mean, suddenly I completely lost the signal here to restart with my phone. If I can just keep the discussion. Yeah, sorry, I apologize for that. So Maurizio, basically, I wanted just to focus on these different linkages that the Peronist Party established with different sectors of society, in the sense that I think that since the very first mobilization that we observed in Argentina, basically after 1995, so the creation of the Plan Trabajar by Carlos Menem, and the very first creation of contentious movements in Argentina, we observed this kind of, I would call it like a sort of blackmail strategy in a I would say non-normative meaning of the word, by several movements that understood precisely what you were talking when.
Seems to be some volatility on that line. Maurizio, I'm sorry, I don't know. I think we need to keep being a bit pragmatic and disorganized. This bottom-up
Yes.
way of working. Yeah, as soon as Enrico gets back, we try to get another installment of his question. But
Yes.
maybe you start elaborating yourself so that we just don't wait silently.
Okay, and then he can probably reformulate at the end. So I was saying, well, just thinking about this puzzle of workers and Peronism. I think there is a deep Peronist identity of workers in Argentina and of the population in Argentina, which partly is related to the classic Peronism. So there are now generation of workers which are sort of which keep the gains of Peronism, of classic Peronism of the 50s, which projected the working class of Argentina to the worst stage in terms of level of income, level of wealth, possibility of growth, class so the possibility of upgrading. So this idea is still there, but I would say that, and this is of course represented by trade unions. Trade unions are Peronist trade unions, the majority of them, even those that may have distanced themselves at a certain point in time. In 1995, the Central Trade Union Confederation split into two different organizations. One was basically the organization around teachers and public employees. They split from that kind of Peronism, which was at that time represented by Menem, to go back and support the new Peronism of Kirchner and Fernandez. So there are shifts. Not all Peronists support Peronist governments, because Peronism is a mutating kind of movement. You might say that it might be populism of the left and the right, and sometimes it's center left, sometimes it's center right, and also there is a Peronism which is discursive Peronism, which is different from economic reality. So they may say that that there is a sector of Argentina which is getting the wealth of the country by exporting agro commodities, and that there is another part which is poor, but they are not actually changing that model of accumulation. There's not an attempt of changing the kind of extractivist model of accumulation. And actually, researchers here and in Latin America are calling about neo-extractivism, all the political economy of progressive movements and progressive governments, what has been called the pink tide, which have dominated politics in Latin America from 2003 till 2012, 2015, roughly speaking, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, etc. So neo-extractivism was the accumulation model of populist government. So they have used some of the resources to generate inclusiveness, to generate more income, which means also consumption for the internal market, and then growth based on internal market, and then some part of this wealth that comes from extraction goes back to the working class and go back to certain populist discourses and framework. So going back to what this means for the working class, and dividing this into, well, for the informal and precarious, and for those in the formal sector, when there is a Peronist government which is actively doing something for redistribution of income, there is clearly a scope for labor conflict in the formal sector to grow again, and the same for informal sector workers to claim part of the benefits that the formal sector is getting. because if there are a new round of collective bargaining and workers in the public sector, in the private sector are getting their salary increases as a sort of chain reaction, workers in precarious conditions or in the informal sector get improvements, even if it's just a nominal improvement, because there is here a minimum wage salary, which is increase following the increases of inflation or negotiation, basically in the formal sector of the economy. And at the same time, because this condition of informality and precariousness is not going to change, and as I said, in my view, is going to remain stable and to create a sort of two different kind of working classes reaction in Argentina in the near future, or maybe a possible alliance with new proletarianized sector. So the same kind of pro-labor policy applies with poorest workers that are represented by social movements which are more territorially based and have different kind of developments in terms of the way they use this income, which is in a way is a sort of welfare, sort of basic welfare, which include an amount for each kids, which include support for building new houses, providing a little bit of infrastructure in terms of sanitation in poor neighborhoods, etc. So just to round up, well, Peronism mutate constantly, and there is a mutation, not necessarily in the discourse, which is always calling for national growth. So in this sense, is populist is in the more traditional sense. So it's like calling people to be part of a project, but with a lot of rhetoric. Because, as I said, the model of accumulation has not changed, not even during the agro-commodity boom of the 2003 on. And this, of course, has a cost, because it's a country that is highly dependent on one particular sector, families, we could say, of Argentina, which are the one that owns the lands and exploit these lands and bring money, hard currency. So they produce a small amount of GDP, but they bring in dollars, which need to be used to pay debts. And now that Argentina has been newly indebted, they have an even stronger power. So they can play the game they want with any government, Peronist, less Peronist, populist or not. So there are limits in the way in which this sort of pro-labor populist discourse can work in Argentina, because of the economy of Argentina and because of the place Argentina occupy in the global scenario. Of course, it's different with the United States. Guglielmo was mentioning this as sort of a possible parallel, because it's a different kind of economy, and because there is still a very powerful industrial sector, which is not that it's not existent in Argentina, and actually there are highly developed in terms of technology industry, for instance, in steel production, but overall the industrial capacity and industrial development of Argentina is not comparable with the United States, and even not even in terms of internal market, which was something that actually was the strength of the import substitution industrialization, which was at the root of populism in the 40s and 50s when the Peronism, the classic Peronism, emerged. So there was a country which needed to be industrialized, one, and then industrialized how? With national capital and an alliance between industrialist working class and the political movement, which was then created by Peron. That was his great vision. And at the same time, you know, so the fate of the Argentinian working class has been to end up under the Peronist umbrella, in the good and in the bad sense. The bad sense, of course, is because communists couldn't develop, or socialists couldn't growth as parties, as political parties, and even within trade unions, they were actually repressed, physically repressed by Peron themselves. So, but that's another question, I mean, big issue.
Enrico, if you are with us, can you?
Yeah, I think I hope to be able to do so. When I start talking, the signal disappears. I'll try very briefly just to add to close up my reflections I was trying to do. My point is, I mean, focusing about the logics that moved the precarious and informal sectors to mobilize. In Argentina, we observe, and you in your writings often put the attention on this, that the centrality of trade unions in Argentine industrial relations, and also the political culture of Argentina, push the informal sector to mobilize in order to basically to be to achieve the same kind of incorporation into the policy domain that the trade unions historically had in Argentina. So it was a kind of incorporation of new sectors, what in fact occurred in Argentina. And the Peronism during the pink tide did precisely this. The point is that, of course, power relations were different between the trade unions and the movement. The trade unions enjoyed the political support of the government, and also in bargaining table. There was at the same time the political cooptation of several movements that were introduced in the so-called Piquetero cabinet by Néstor Kirchner, and you had the separation between movements that were accepted into the table and more contentious movement responding to other ideologies and political logics that stayed out of this table, of this process of incorporation. And you saw it even institutionally. You had the Ministry of Labor that were focused on trade relationship with trade union and industrial relation, and the minister led by Alicia Kirchner that was focused on the relationship with the movement that had been co-opted by the government. So you had, and also there was a kind of bifurcation in the subsidies and in the welfare and in the welfare policy that moved the Argentine government under Cristina in particular. You had the child allowance that responded to a more electoral and universalist inspiration, and you had the distribution of planes that were precisely did in order to appease contention movements and to politically deal with them. So you had a very different kind of linkages that allowed the Peronist government to appease different sectors in different ways, in some sense reproducing power stratification between different sectors of society. What you did, what I think is that it is true that there is a trade union fetishism, particularly in Argentina when studying the Argentine case, but this is due also because the own movements, I mean, fell in this kind of trade union fetishism in the sense that they wanted to be recognized by the state and incorporated by the state. The logic that moved the contentiousness in Argentina was to be included in such a political exchanges. There wasn't another kind of political project moving beyond this kind of reasoning. So in this sense, I think that what you said in the end around a so-called Bolivianization of the Argentine economy is perfect. What is different between Bolivia and Argentina is that there were the movements that also because of power relationship within the Bolivian economy had the political agenda. So the trade union in Bolivia are
Desaparecido again. It's we got quite a lot now of his point. I don't know if Maurizio wants to answer now or we take Lorenzo. Whether Maurizio or Lorenzo.
Sorry, my microphone was off. No, just to say we can probably take Enrico question and answer later when he's back.
Yeah.
So we move to Lorenzo now.
So should I speak? Okay. So the good thing is that at least today the Normale connection should be fine. So I should not be disappearing during my very brief discussion. I already basically presented all the positive aspects of what I also learned from Maurizio in my improvised presentation before. So I will just now focus on the bullet points that I want to stress to trigger a further discussion. Okay, first of all, I will engage more with the expert of industrial relation, less with the expert of the Argentina case, as Enrico did. So to integrate a little bit the question, the comments we can address to you. In the meantime, Enrico is back, but maybe we can leave to later. Okay, I will base this discussion on both your more recent work, especially the one very interesting, the provocative paper on trade union fetishes, but also on your earlier work that have been quite important for us here to develop certain aspects of worker agency connected to some movement tradition. So I actually have three comments slash questions. The first one is a suggestion, then the second one is a provocation, and the third one is an open question. So, but they are also not only for you, also for myself. Or not, don't consider that I want only to provoke you or to ask a question, but also because I'm certain to engage on your field. So I'm also trying to look forward to your support and contribution to this idea. The first thing that I'd like to ask is this suggestion is referring more to your studies on self-organized collectives, social movements type of organization that you want to you stress a lot in your in your book as well in your article. So, and it seems that there is a strong connection, also engagement from you on trying to to come closer to the field of social movement studies. So in this sense, you represent a little bit in the framework of Reimer's framework, a radical critical scholar on this field of industrialization. And my suggestion is, even though you are starting to engage with social movement tradition and theory, I think you might even engage with this tradition more, with more also willingness to embrace the traditional toolkit of social movement studies. What I mean by that, I mean, for instance, talking in a let's say positive jargon, to incorporate in your studies, in your research on this sort, contextual and organizational resources that are part of social movement theory as independent variables. What I mean by that, I mean that you nicely present a very nice framework of analyzing in which, for instance, in your studies on labor process dynamics of mobilization in Argentina as well as in other countries, you basically give us a very nice analysis of how mobilization can arise from the workplace as well as from context related to the workplace, also as well as from factors related to the political economy of industrialization. But what seems to me not very explicit, to not say missing, is to look at characteristics that, for instance, social movement theories are quite already independent per se, such as the protest culture of a country, the informal networks of activists of a given community, the presence or not of social movement organization, the culture of the ground of the core group of workers. Because it seems to me that these, let's call them variables, may play an important role as well as dynamics internal of the context of the labor sphere. Even though you nicely introduce not only, you already had a very good elaboration on contextual factors that are playing a part in explaining this self-organized mobilization. They are not only referable to the labor process sphere, but what I think I not urge you, I might suggest you to do is even engage more with all these, tradition social movement toolkits that might be helpful in, helping to understand and explaining this material process of social movements within the labor sphere. This is the first comment, the suggestion that I like to address to you and to engage you in the discussion. Then I have a provocation that is just to trigger a further discussion. Is about paraphrasing the book by Colin Crouch, the strange non-disappearance, of neoliberalism. I would also say, with a provocative tone, the strange non-disappearance of traditional trade unions. And now I wanted to say, even because is a sector on which I'm starting to a little bit work on my own in platform economy. What I'm saying by that, if in the very early mobilizations in this sector, we refer especially, for instance, to food delivery couriers, but also other type of platform workers, we have witnessing an important role of self-organizing groups and of rank and file trade unions. So following a little bit your model of analysis, then we should go beyond traditional trade unions. Very recently, and the Italian case, but not only, we can even look at the German case, France, Spain, and in other countries in Europe, we have actually seen a return of traditional trade unions in engaging with this mobilization, organization, and even in negotiation with the state institution and platform company. So, and even more radical, even I would say, there is also a working hypothesis on this, that with the return of trade unions, we are also observing a sort of the tendency dynamic also of the importance of national industrial relations, in the sense that, for instance, still talking about the Courier case, is more a working hypothesis, but it will be interesting to develop it further. In the German case, now there is, you know, a diffusion of work councils, for instance, also in engaging with platforms. In Italy, maybe there is a potential possibility of maybe social consultation involving traditional trade unions as well as other type of actors. So my provocation here is, we are not sure. I understand your intention. I fully agree with you that we should extend the field beyond the traditional trade unionism. But maybe will be also the case in the new digital sector. Traditional union play and might play still a role today. The final point is an open question. Is a focus on your very more recent, let's say, research agenda, the one that you might develop from fetishism of trade unions. It is, you know, the one also we are discussing another scenario with David Sacchetto 2 months ago. This I'm very interested myself in the subject of how to connect class formation processes to the dynamics of capital accumulation. And more broadly, I'm very interested in seeing how to build theoretical frameworks and set up empirical studies on this nexus between working class formation processes and the capital cycle and these laws of motion, okay? And my question is a question to us, and is how you think, operationalize this nexus? Are you, you know, already working on this nexus from a theoretical point of view? Have you gone further in such a research agenda? Because I really like to engage with this very broad topic, but I think is quite central, no? On for, you know, extending this field of study to other field of study, political economy, reproduction, social reproduction theory, post-colonial studies. That I think is your intention precisely in your more recent research. And so I'm curious to know more about this, you know, your future plans on this nexus. So I shut up and I even spoke too much. Thank you, Guglielmo, also for this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lorenzo. Maurizio, I don't know if you've seen in the chat, no. Sorry.
Can you repeat?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, we are all very precarious today. So, now, Maurizio, if you want, you can answer Lorenzo's question, and in the meanwhile, there is in the chat the point by Enrico, if you can see it.
Okay, perfect. In relation to the suggestion, so the idea of incorporating social movement tradition, I totally agree. I think there is a problem of communication between social movement tradition and labor movement or trade union industrial relation studies. Because clearly, I mean, the industrial tradition take the labor movement and it focused just on this, and I think partly is right, because historically this is the movement that has been able to produce long-lasting changes, and at the same time is the social movement which is most strictly related to the way in which accumulation is wealth is created in capitalism. So in this sense, it's very much, for me, very much focus on the root of the problem and on the way in which injustice is created. Injustice is created first of all at work, but and I think here you're right, and I mean this is simply a matter of finding the time and refocusing the research agenda, which very often is also a matter of learning a different language or learning a different debate, which might be the debate that people in the social movement studies area takes, and also get a little bit of familiarization with certain studies. But I think there is strong potential for cooperation, and there are clearly lots of linkages. I think that when I, for instance, spoke about the network of solidarity that the labor process create as the basis, as the conditio sine qua non, to use the terminology that John Kelly used in relation to injustice, I think he's wrong about injustice. And that's why I said, no, it's solidarity, and it's a solidarity generated by the labor process. I think here there is clearly a connection between a structural reasoning based on the existence of a labor process that put together people and that create the conditions for solidarity to emerge, and for solidarity as an embryonic form of solidarity. This is the way I put it, which of course is then something that need to be developed by network of culture. So workers share football matches, they share a beer when they go after they work in the factory. They know themselves. They share similar kind of working class identity. This was also clearly evident from my research in Argentina in the Fiat factories, and explain the mobilization. Similarly, is the political knowledge and the political insertion of some of the leaders of the mobilization, which even though they were not leaders before the mobilization, they became leader because they were leader, natural leader, and also because they were politically informed. And here I think it's very important to think about left agency, so left militant, which is a topic which has been very little developed in industrial relations and by militants. Sheila Cohen is one of those that has done research on this kind of militancy, and also Kim Moody, and not by chance, because they came from that kind of tradition. And I think that this is important, and it reconnects to what is the work that is being done, for instance, by Jamie Woodcock on platform economy from a worker's perspective, from a workers' inquiry perspective. I think here is where there is a connection that can be also easily established, starting from a study of workers organizing, not a social movement organizing, but looking at the way in which the toolkits of social movements, so to say, just to use your words, are used. So I definitely agree with your suggestion, and maybe you can give me a hand in preparing an article, just to think in a more practical term. And in relation to the provocation, I think I've been clear in my paper on trade union fetish, is that the problem is not that trade unions disappear. I think trade unions are movements and institutions. So they are class and they are institutions. They reproduce capital and then they go against capitalism, and they are both at the same time. This is something that we know from early Hyman studies, and I think should be clear for all of us. What I was criticizing, and I'm criticizing, is the tradition in the field that start and end with trade unions, and not with trade unions as like form of organization which are looked at from a processual point of view, but as form of organization which are set. So studies about precarity become studies of how trade union respond to precarity, about how trade union makes or think about their strategy. So basically it's a study that is a social policy study, not an industrial relations study, and not and of course far from my understanding of what workers' action is and workers' agency is. So my provocation with trade union fetishism goes exactly toward this kind of formulation, this kind of framework. So we want trade unions. We are engaged with trade unions. We believe are important, even at its institutional level. And trade unions, actually existing trade union, actually existing institution, occupy a very powerful role in certain strategic economic sector at world level. I think, for instance, about the role of the ITF in terms of overlooking at the chain in logistic and transport. They are at capitalist choke point, and they are a powerful union from a powerful sector of workers, which can really be important in leading change. So I'm not criticizing this, and I think trade union is probably the best kind of organization for workers because it talks the language of workers. They wouldn't need a social movement, so to say. So more like the one that address civil society questions. So I think there is a need to go beyond trade unions in this sense, because this then can open more class perspective in terms of the analysis of how changes are brought forward by working class agents. And here I think I'm going to your open question when you ask, well, how can we connect different processes of class formation with changes in capitalism and capital cycle? I think here there is, first of all, an issue of resources. From my little point of view of an under-resourced researcher in Argentina, there is not much I can do in terms of developing field work, but I have a couple of ideas which I've tried to put together in a research grant proposal. One that Guillermo saw some years ago, about first of all about shifting our focus on the city. Secondly, shifting our focus on the city as where different rings of the chain of production are set. So, for instance, if we think about the chain of essential work in the logistic of foods, just to talk about delivery. Here we have from producers of tomatoes and lettuce in the field around cities. Here in Argentina, at least each city has his own green belt of small producers, which are migrants, which are Bolivian. They are connected to to other sectors which belongs to the same chain, which provide food to people. So why don't we investigate how these chains are connected one with the other? So how class form across these different layers. The same with the provision of care. Again, here we have provision by poor workers, informal workers, mainly women, that probably live in the same neighborhoods but work in houses of rich people, or they work as cleaners in houses, in buildings. So how do they live and work in the city? How they survive the city? How they survive and their engagement with the formal work and informal work, with the neighborhoods and with work and with the workplace and other notes of work in the city. For instance, they use transport, and they use terminals of transport. They use trains, and they mix with other group of people going to work at the same time, so in the same places. I always see this when I travel by train from my home to Buenos Aires, and arriving at the south of the city in a train overcharged of all working class people, which are strictly connected, even if they don't know and even if they can't see, and we don't see them because we don't analyze this kind of movements. But this is just an idea. Maybe it's my fantasy. But of course, we need to sort of make fantasy in terms of exploring in a more ambitious way new research ideas and new research framework. What I very often think is, well, how could have been Marx so brilliant in understanding that what it was at that time a vanguard could have become the working class, at least in one sector of the world. So we need to think about what is the working class and what might be, and where might be class formation going on from Marx's point of view, which of course it means that we need to understand how capitalism works, how accumulation is produced. So if we understand that accumulation is produced in cities, we need to focus on city. That's why I think cities are important. And here, of course, the work of David Harvey has been very illuminating for me in terms of let me understand how different circuits of accumulation are connected. So the circuit of production, but also the circuits of circulation and the circuits of financialization, because this is another layer which I think is very important, and that is it affects the working class, which is the increasing dependency on debt. So popular classes are depending on debts, which once again is difficult for them to understand that is a capital accumulation strategy. It is difficult for us in a way, but it is part of the problem. It's part of the problem. So all these kind of things, I think can really be useful in terms of thinking about a new research project. But again, we need to understand how capitalism works at our time, and in specific places, of course, which is not less important. Here, I think there's some interesting work by people in the labor regime analysis, or studying development from development. So I'm talking about Lion Campling, and also from the social reproduction side, Alessandra Mezzadri. But I think it's a field in itinere. So we need to think about this in this sense.
Thank you, Maurizio. We need to go towards the end and conclusion. Is there any question from anybody? Lorenzo, I can't hear you if you are saying something. Or I don't know whether you want to get back to anything about neoliberalism and space, and in comparison Argentina and Bolivia, the point that Enrico had tried to put. Or if there is any other question, please ask it now.
I think if I can just answer Enrico's question, here at the point in one of the points he made was one of the point was that actually social movements in Argentina are following the step of trade unions. So they want to be recognized as trade unions and get the benefits of a worker, or at least they want to go toward that direction. And I think this is what I call the exception of Argentina, which has to do with history of Argentina and the role of trade unions. So even social movements have this trade union framework, think about themselves not simply as social movement representing civil society. They represent workers. They want workers of the popular economy. So that's the way they call the informal economy, to be seen as a crucial economic factor at the same level of workers in the formal sector. That's they see, and they see themselves as representing workers, and they claim things related to work in the formal sector. They want trade union to get health protection, and here in Argentina, trade unions play also that role. They represent workers, but they are also provider of health services. They want guarantees. They want also a formal seat in formal tripartite meetings. So they want to play a political role, the same role that trade unions leaders have played with many, not all, the Peronist governments. In this sense, social movement in Argentina are different from other social movements. And at the same time, what characterized this movement, and in this sense they are similar to trade unions, is the Peronist identity. So if there is an election, they will go for a Peronist leader, even if they know that they will be struggling to get something from certain leader, because of course, as I said, Peronism mutate constantly, and ideas change within the movement, and they are very much how can I say, dependent also on market idea. Not in the sense of a neoliberal, kind of policy makers, but with the unknown logic of capitalism in terms of how to manage the economy. And actually, they are managing the economy just by following what capitalism is saying, and without any real power of changing it. very recently there has been an attempt by the government to control a very important exporter of agricultural commodities, which is called Vicentin, which was based on the fact that it basically stole money from the Banco Nación, which is a public bank, but they had to withdraw because of of the sector opposition, of the presence of the states in a crucial sector. So here we see how limited our government is the nerve of government in this. So I think here it is the answer to the question. So there is an incorporation, there is a simulation of the unions. At the same time, there is a dependency on the state and a dependency on communism, which is a very complex movement with lots of different faces and ideas at the same time.
Thank you, Maurizio. I think in addition to the connection problems, we are starting having battery power problems. So I would just wrap it up. It has been very interesting. A lot of food for thought on the links between labor movements and urban movements, on between labor movements and economic processes, between labor movements and political processes. So they're all three big things, but with labor center, which is very much appreciated. And obviously, Maurizio works in Argentina and has worked in the UK before, but he's originally from Sardinia. And we hope that once this current pandemic state is over, it will be possible to invite him and meet him in person to discuss these research avenues much more in depth, to compare a lot of similar research that is done in our faculty, in particular on urban labor movements and these two dimensions of social struggles. So I really hope there will be another opportunity to invite him maybe for some time to work together. In the meanwhile, thank everybody for listening, for your patience with the technological constraints. We try to make technologies work for us, but it doesn't always function that well. So thank you very much, Maurizio, for being with us. Anybody else want to say the last word, or we are? I'm sorry we cannot take you for an Italian espresso or for a glass of Tuscan wine, but I'm sure there will be another opportunity.
Yeah, that's the hope I'm also keeping. So let's see if we can meet in person and for a longer time and work together. That would be really fascinating for all of us, I think, because there are lots of overcrossing lines of research and interest and political commitment. So let's cross fingers. Bye bye.
Thank you. Adios. Hasta luego.
Ciao.
Ciao. Ciao.